Background for those of you that may not know us that well. Our ministry is based on two discoveries. The first is that these 66 books that we glibly call the Bible, even though they were penned by over 40 different guys over the better part of about 2,000 years, they're an integrated message. And I don't mean thematically, that there's a theme in the old fulfilled in the new. No, far more than that. That every detail, every number, every place name is there by deliberate design in the original. So that's the first thing, that we have an integrated message system in our laps and once you discover its integration, you need to do that for yourself, and we'll show you some things. The second discovery emerges from that, and that is that the origin of this integrated message system had to come from outside our time domain. Literally, we're in possession of a message system of extraterrestrial origin, and you can prove that, and we'll show you how. And one integrated sign. The New Testament is in the Old Testament concealed, and the Old Testament is in the New Testament revealed. You know, it's interesting when you finish the Old Testament to realize that you've got a collection of books that have unappeased longings, unfulfilled prophecies, and so on. And it's incomplete without the new. They go together in great ways. But hidden treasures in the biblical text. Are there such things as hidden messages in the Bible? You know, the Bible says so. One example is Proverbs 25:2. It is the glory of God to conceal a thing and the honor or duty of kings to search out a matter. And that's what we're about. We'll take a look at some of these. Now I'm going to give you a riddle. This is just to get started. Who is the oldest man in the Bible? Anyone? Methuselah, sure. He lived 969 years, yet he died before his father. How can he be the oldest man in the Bible? He died before his father. Anyone? His father was what? Enoch. Good for you. Everybody forgets who his father was. He was Enoch. Enoch's an interesting guy. The oldest prophecy in the Bible, uttered by a prophet, is a prophecy of the second coming of Jesus Christ, and was uttered before the flood of Noah. That itself is kind of interesting. But Enoch, at the age, when he was 65 years old, had an experience that altered the rest of his life. For 300 years following, he walked with God, whatever that means. He also was given a prophecy. You see, the flood of Noah did not come as a surprise. The flood of Noah had been preached on for 4 generations. But Methuselah was told that when his son was born, that as long as his son is alive, the judgment of the flood would be withheld. And therefore he names him Methuselah. And the word Methuselah comes from 2 Hebrew roots. One is muth. It's a root which means death. It's used 125 times in the Old Testament. And the verb shalach, which means to bring or send forth. His death will send forth, is really what the name means. And if you do your homework, his death shall bring. The year of the flood, Methuselah was 187 when he had a son by the name of Lamech, and Lamech was 182 when Noah was born, and everybody knows that it was the 600th year of Noah, the flood came. In other words, the year that Methuselah died was indeed the year that the flood came. His life was a prophecy. And that's why it's provocative to realize that he also has the longest lifetime in the Bible, because his lifetime then becomes, in effect, symbolic of God's mercy. But by the way, girls, can you imagine raising that kid? Every time he caught a cold, the entire neighborhood would go into panic, right? Well, if there's all this meaning hidden behind the name Methuselah, what about the other 9 guys in Genesis 5? You know, Genesis 5 is one of those strange, people say, what's your favorite book of prophecy? Chapter in prophecy, I'll say Genesis 5. That surprises people, because you don't think of that as a book of prophecy. First couple of chapters of Genesis, the creation, hey, that's rich stuff. There's a lot of fun there. Genesis 3, that's the seed plot of the entire Bible. Every doctrine in the Bible has its roots in Genesis 3. In Genesis 4, the first murder, we all know the story. From Genesis 6 on, we have the flood of Noah and all that action. Genesis 5 is one of those chapters you tend to sort of skip over. I mean, it's just a genealogy from Adam to Noah, 10 guys. And the problem with Genesis 5 is that it's not translated for you. The rest of the Bible is translated into English or whatever language you're comfortable with. But we don't translate proper names. Even in Strong's Lexicon or whatever, you don't find proper names dealt with. But every Hebrew word is based on three-letter roots, and if you know the roots, you can infer the basic meaning of the words. And I'll come back to that before we're through. We're going to discover some very, very intriguing things about the Hebrew language before we're through. But the point is, part of our problem is we don't know what those names mean. My formal legal name is Charles. What does Charles mean? There's all kinds of speculations. No one really knows. There's just conjectures. And your own name, very likely, the meaning of it has been lost in antiquity. Well, let's take a look at this, the genealogy of Genesis 5. Adam, Seth, Enosh, Kenan, Mahalalel, Yared, Enoch, Methuselah, Lamech, and Noah. 10 guys. Well, let's take a look at this. Adam, of course, pretty easy. What does Adam mean? It comes from Adamah. It means what? Man. That's pretty straightforward. And when Adam and Eve had their son, they named him with a root that means appointed. In fact, Eve even says so in the chapter before, Genesis 4:25. Eve said, "For God hath appointed me another seed instead of Abel, whom Cain slew." It always fascinates me. People always ask, where did Cain get his wife? I don't know why that's such a popular question. Obviously, Cain married his sister because he was Abel. Huh? Anyway, we'll move on. Obviously, they had a bunch of. They had a son by the name of Enosh. Now, Enosh comes from a root which means mortal, frail, or miserable. It comes from the root anash, which means to be incurable. It's used of a wound or grief, sickness or wickedness. So it really means mortal. So now, and that's kind of a tough name to go through school with. Mortal, whatever. His son he named Kenan. Now, in some Bibles it's translated Canaan. It's not Aramaic, it's Hebrew. And the Kenites were a tribe. In fact, Balaam in Numbers 24, I think it is, makes a pun on their name, the Kenites. The word Kenan comes from a root which means sorrow or dirge or elegy. That's also a rough label to go through school with. You're going to choose up a rugby team. Hey, sorrow, you're on our side. It doesn't work really well. So he apparently, when he had a son, had enough of this. He gave his son a very unusual name. Rather a mouthful, but a wonderful name, Mahalalel, which means the Mahal, which means the blessed or praised one, and El, the name of God. Mahalalel is the praised God or the blessed God. That's pretty neat. And he has a son by the name of Yared, which is a verb, which means shall come down. And I won't get into the conjectures surrounding this. Our time is short. We'll keep moving here. But we have then, of course, he has a son by the name of Enoch. Now, we've talked about Enoch, but what does his name mean? It turns out it's an academic term, meaning commencement or teaching. And he, of course, has a son by the name of Methuselah, which we've already pointed out means his death shall bring. And that is, of course, the year the flood came, and it's a fulfillment of prophecy. He has a son by the name of Lamech. Now, here's a root that we still retain in our English language, the word lament or lamentation. And but it comes from a root meaning despairing. And he has a son by the name of Noah. How many of you have heard of Noah? Can I see a show of hands? About 2/3. That's kind of our trouble here, right? I'm kidding, of course. Now, Noah is just a two-letter root. It's derived from Nacham, which means to bring relief or comfort. In fact, Lamech, his father, indicates that's why he named him Noah, because in Genesis 5:29, it says he called his name Noah, saying, "The same shall comfort us concerning our work and the toil of our hands," and so on. So, okay, we have the genealogy. Adam, Seth, Enosh, Kenan, Mahalalel, Yared, Enoch, Methuselah, Lamech, and Noah. 10 guys. But now we have enough background to take a crack at translating that genealogy. Man is appointed mortal sorrow. But the blessed God shall come down, teaching that his death shall bring the despairing comfort or rest. Every time I do this, I get goosebumps. Man is appointed mortal sorrow, but the blessed God shall come down, teaching that his death, whose death? God's death, shall bring the despairing comfort or rest. Now, this little insight, to me, is precious for several reasons. You have here a simple one-sentence summary of the gospel of Jesus Christ. And it also indicates that God's plan of redemption was not a knee-jerk reaction because Adam surprised him by falling. God knew from the beginning he would and had a plan in his mind to deal with it. But there's also a pragmatic aspect of this. There's no way you'll ever convince me that a group of Jewish rabbis contrived to hide a summary of the Christian gospel In a genealogy, in their highly venerated Torah, books of Moses? No way. So I think this is provocative. It's a good beginning. One integrated design. The New Testament is in the Old Testament concealed in more ways than we could possibly enumerate if we had a month to do it. And the Old Testament is in the New Testament, of course,